so I'm going to go through an example of putting data-driven story into action with some of my own data on a project that I'm currently working on and have been evolving. I think the topic of this project is super interesting, but the focus is really on how I took a lot of data and used tools that I'm going to talk to you about to create a story that was used with a lot of senior executives. So again, it's great to be with you today and be able to share this topic. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting, I don't know about you all, but when I start something new, I love the new part of a project. So I started doing this work about 8 or 9 years ago. And by now, I normally would have moved on to something else, but I keep continuing to teach this program and evolve it. And the thing that really inspires me are the phone calls I get from people who've been in the program. So I hear from people who've gone through it and go back to work and put these tools into action and call me and say things like, hey, I'm getting more time in my board of directors meeting because my presentation went so well and it was so engaging, they want me back. Or one individual who said that we were working on a project for 9 months and we were getting no traction, and then we put some of these tools in place and did our report differently and our presentation differently, and now one of the senior executives is paying for and allocated a one-day off-site meeting to go over this topic. So again, I keep getting very positive reinforcement that it's working, and that's why we're here today. Data-driven storytelling, if you put in these terms, is pretty popular now. When I started doing this 8 or 9 years ago, I was one of the only people really working on this type of content, but it's not visualization. So what you usually see is, you know, ways to make pretty charts. And what you'll see here is that we're really blending storytelling and data together in a different way. So when you talk about storytelling, and it's interesting, if I'm in a group of people who are mainly analytical and you talk about storytelling, and you can just see the little grimace in their faces, right? Because storytelling sounds kind of hokey. People think about, you know, feelings or that one person whose opinion basically is used to permeate a story, which really isn't data-driven. It's, you know, old wives' tales. So storytelling alone, feelings, kind of soft, maybe entertaining, but not what, you know, what we, the analytics people of the world, do. And then when you think about pure data and data analytics, there's a sense that it's truth. If I just knew what was in the data, you know, I would know for sure what we should be doing. It's also more hard-hitting, right? You get the sense that, you know, particularly if you're in HR, well, if I have data, I'll be like those finance people, and people will believe me a little bit more, which means it's also more compelling and more convincing. And rather than these two words being a tale of two opposites, what we find is they really work together incredibly well. Oh, and neither of them is perfect by itself. So data, we might think data is truth, but it's not. And you can see on the left here, I have this, there are multiple books on how to lie with statistics. Any data set has multiple stories in it. So what's important is that you choose the data that's going to help you tell a story around something that your business needs or society needs or whoever your audience is, because data alone is not going to help you drive action, which is what we all want to really do. And then when it comes to the storytelling side of the world, I mean, there's some really interesting neuroscience data out there, which I'm not going to talk about today, but you know, many of you on the line have probably seen it, where what we're learning now by studying the human brain is that people don't remember numbers. And how are you going to get people to take action if they don't remember the basis of what you're telling them? So we need to get emotional triggers. We need people to pay attention. We don't want them to just argue with our data and try to find out why it's wrong. So there's pieces of the storytelling world and pieces of the data world that are both important, but on their own don't provide as much input for action as when we can put the two together. And that's what we're really focusing on. So the basis of the programs that I teach and the writing I do is what one of the students in the class called the DDAR model. It's kind of funny. I talk about data, dialogue, action, results, but I was on a phone call and they said, yeah, we're using the DDAR model, and I had no idea what they were talking about because I had never made it shorter. Well, fine, I learned from other people, so now it is officially the DDAR model. But we focus this process in on these 4 pieces that are all equally important. So yes, we have data. And then from the data, the key piece is that you have to create the dialogue. So the story part is between the data and the dialogue. And it's the data and the dialogue together that result in action. And you don't get results unless you have action. So it's data, dialogue, action, results. Now, with a lot of the data work that I had done over the years, I find that people like to jump to action, particularly with survey work. So you show somebody survey results, and they don't want to have a dialogue. They look at their data, they decide what they think is the right action, and they proceed to action. I can tell you that from doing lots of analyses on what individuals do with data, when you just jump from data to action, you do not get the result you need, because you normally need an action to involve more than one person. So the thing that happens when you engage in that story-driven dialogue is that you're involving the group of people who have to be involved in the action. In my survey example, it would be employees. I need to take the data and have a dialogue about what I think the story is and engage people in that story so I can emotionally get them interested in taking an action. And then when we talk about results, what we're looking for is a measurable business result, not a result we just all made up. And there's a lot of made up or assumed results out there in our work, but when we're working on this model, we're really trying to tie together the 4 pieces to measurable business results. So how do we do that? One of the things that we've learned through, again, I've taught this program as a public program. I've gone into a lot of companies and done custom work. And the big piece of making this process successful is the individual doing the work and the role of confidence. So when you create your story, it has to be intentional. And this is really important because for the story to be intentional, you have to have a point of view about the data, and you have to be confident that it's right enough to, correct enough to be able to tell the story and tell one story and not alternative stories. So a lot of times what I find people are doing with data is they're presenting maybe 10 stories and letting the audience choose. The audience will not align on one. When you don't tell one story, it results in either people ignoring your data or maybe taking an action that's really not the best action. And when you get 10 people who are supposed to be lined up doing one action, they're all doing something different, including some of them just ignoring you, you are not going to get a business result. So building our own confidence that we can find a story, that our story is the right one, is a really important piece of what we're doing in training and learning the skill. Now, towards that goal, what's really important is that when we start engaging in data-driven storytelling for action, for results, that we realize it's really a team sport. And there's 2 kinds of people. There are data people and there are dialogue people, and one is not better than the other. And for data-driven storytelling, we need both of those individuals. And this has been an important part of the teaching work that at least I've been doing, and I've seen it have really positive results because particularly in the HR world, we need to be respectful of everyone's skills. So a lot of companies have, they're bringing on their analytics teams and they've got incredibly impressive people who are data analysts. And then there's other people who feel a little left behind. And I think it's important to realize that the generalists or the people who might not have as strong of analytics skills are really deep in context, and the analytics team needs those individuals to help them tell the story. So one of the things we've done when we start out teaching is use a diagnostic tool so that every individual can get a sense of where they are on the continuum, because even though I'm saying they're a data person or a dialogue person, it is possible you can be both, and I'm sure everybody on this phone call is great at both of those skills. But people tend to have, propensity for one versus the other, and if you can get a sense of where you are and then where you want to be, it helps calibrate the audience and helps people understand also where their own development skills should go. So these are just 4 questions that I use on a real simple diagnostic tool. And you can probably look at this and guess which ones are the ones that designate a data person versus a dialogue person. It's pretty simple, but we've used it with a lot of individuals. And then what we do with this when people are done is ask them to plot it into this little 2x2 quadrant. So you can be low on the data scores or high, and you can be low or high on the dialogue. So again, my guess is we do have a lot of people here in Quadrant B who are high on both data and dialogue. And then we have people who are better at one than the other. And again, there's no right or wrong answer in this, but what I'm doing is trying to give people a sense of where they are when they come into the program, and then set up teams so that people who are really good at data can work with people who are good at the dialogue piece. And there's a second piece that we do, which is connecting where you are in data and dialogue to the type of data that might be best for you to work with. Now, this is a very simple way of thinking about data, but I've created a way of thinking about data with 6 different levels. So the simplest level is level 1. And when we think about that kind of data, there are 2 things about it. It's point-in-time data, and it's objective. So basically, it's the type of data nobody's going to argue about. So if right now I could stop and I could count how many people on the webinar, and we're not going to really argue that. You know, you're not going to say, Theresa, you know, that was subjective. Nope, you're either signed on or you're not. So if you're someone who doesn't have really good analytic skills, starting out with data that's not going to be questioned is going to be easier. It's going to be easier for you to have conversations about it and to start dialogues. And then we move up and data gets longitudinal and it gets more subjective, and maybe we put together the longitudinal with the subjective data and it gets more complex. So more complex data, you're also using more complex analysis tools. And the more you get to complex data, the more fights you can get in with people when you're presenting the data, right? Because let's just take longitudinal. Well, I might want to talk about causation. In fact, I'm going to do that in my example later. And, you know, I'll say that we did this intervention, and from time 1 to time 2, this thing changed. Let's say we did a new training program, and what I saw from time 1 to time 2 is that people's performance appraisal scores went up. So, aha, it worked. Well, you know somebody's going to fight with you about that, because even though your data is complex, you might have done really fancy analysis, you know, you worked really hard to collect the data, but there are other things that might have changed performance. So as you start moving up with complexity, with more complex data, you have to be super confident in what you're doing, and you have to have a pretty good dialogue or backstory, because you have to convince people of things, and just doing analysis is not enough. Now, the way I put these 2 things together is we take the simple to complex rating and we put it together with the kind of, you know, where you are in the data versus dialogue diagnostic tool, and we suggest to people what kind of data they should be working with, the kind of people they should work with, what kind of teams they should be in, and it's been very helpful. It's all really simple, but it's a really good way to basically get people on the same page. So nobody's embarrassed. Like, you know, if I'm a super data person, it's okay for everybody to know that. And also know I might not understand the managers in the unit when I'm trying to tell the story. I might not have the background. And I'm someone who's very good at dialogue skills, and maybe, you know, I can help supplement the big data with some focus group data to make the data come alive. So it's a way to validate everybody's skills and help people think about what's next. And if any of you are interested in having a copy of the full tool, if you write to us, I'd be happy to share that with you. So I'm going to go back to confidence, because I can't say how important this piece of it is. I've just had so many examples where people buy big data sets, or, you know, hire somebody in who's very good at analyzing data, but they have no luck in getting people to take action with their data because they're just not confident in what the results are, or they're not confident in telling the story about the results. We even had one case where a vice president was telling us how the HR person came in the office and talked to him about how many red dots he had on his scorecard, and he got really angry at that person because he had a red dot. So he took a piece of paper and balled it up into a ball, like squished it up into a ball, and threw it at the HR executive, who was devastated. But basically what happened was that person had a red dot because the person that they said that they, turned over or whatever resulted in the red dot, that person had passed away. So the manager was very angry that the HR rep didn't know it. Again, presenting data because we have numbers and we have cool graphs and we have dashboards, but not knowing the backstory created an embarrassing moment, I'll say. So confidence is important. Understanding the skills people have and how to train them is important. Helping people start a conversation that they know someone's going to pay attention to. That means that conversation and story has to be in the language of the audience. And then providing opportunities, for people to use the skill set and share their successes. One of the things we learned, if you look at what great storytellers do, and there are professional groups that meet on storytelling, there are classes on storytelling, which have nothing to do with data. But one of the things that they will tell you is that you have to write down your stories. Now, this is something that we're not very good at in business. So, in fact, I've worked with a lot of companies where I've helped them take their data and create a story, and I worked with one person, right? Here's the person that hired me, and we worked together on it. And what I find is that when that person I work with leaves the company, nobody knows the story anymore. So we don't write down stories. I have great stories, I know companies, but no one in the company knows that they did these things. So every time you're teaching people about storytelling or you're teaching them about a topic, about engagement or something where you had data, everybody's starting from scratch. So if nothing else, write down your stories. Find a place to do that and share the successes. All right, I'm going to give you an example now. Again, this is a 2-3-day program, and I'm giving you just little highlights. But I wanted to show you the importance of getting people to work on the skills they have with the diagnostic tool, a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to walk you through an example with some research that I've been doing. So I've got a lot of work that I do. I'm really interested in growth companies. So what predicts growth, successful growth of a company versus the death of a company? And I've done a lot of research on initial public offerings. And I'm going to go through pieces of a recent study that I'm publishing right now to just show you what some of my choices were and the language I use and how I try to bring what I teach into my own work. So if I look at the context for what I'm doing, the result that I want is I want more IPO companies to survive. Believe it or not, they die out pretty quickly. And that's what attracted me to this study, because I can study what predicts death. Within the first 5 years post-IPO, probably about 50% of the companies are still in business. So it's really cool from a science point of view, right, because I can do causal research pretty easily, longitudinal research, and the prospectuses of these companies have tons of information that is never available at any other time. So we code prospectuses, we do surveys of the executives. I have boatloads of data. And I'm interested in making companies more successful, not just for IPOs, but if I can learn the lessons of IPOs, then I can share them with other kinds of companies. So the actions I need is I need CEOs to pay attention to my research, because this research is showing them what's important for long-term and short-term performance. And what you'll see in a minute is that what I'm finding is important is not necessarily what they think is important. And then what do I need? I need to have that conversation with the right language, and I needed a lot of data, because I didn't want to just collect data on what I think is important, but I wanted to collect data on what they think is important and what I think is important per my research, and then be able to compare all of it. So part of it is getting the right data, but when you have 300 variables from a prospectus, 80 variables from a survey, financial data I downloaded, et cetera, you can't use it all. You have to choose wisely. So the framing of this work was really important. And one of the things that I've learned and that we use a lot in the class is learning how to use pictures in presentations. Now, those of you who are analytics people are probably going, I can't believe she's saying this. Pictures are really important. So let's go back to the neuroscience work. I want people emotionally engaged. I want them to remember my story. So I could have told a million different stories, but what I thought is I want to focus on something the CEOs care about. And it's not necessarily what my conclusion is, but they're all trying to grow their businesses. So the way I framed it was managing the paradoxes of business growth. And the paradox is about life and death. So you can try to grow your company, but as you see here, in the same spot, the same two trees have very different outcomes. So one's alive, one's dead. And that's a pretty compelling, well, I've been told it's a pretty compelling introduction, because I'm going to help people understand how to stay alive and grow versus how to wither away. Now, if I were my good scientist self, I would pick out one of the charts from my academic article, and that would be one of the first things I'd show. Now, look at this. Just immediately when you look at this, think about what your emotion was, like, oh my God, she's not going to really talk about this. Usually the font is even smaller than this when we do these kind of presentations. So I just want you to compare the emotional reaction to that. People hate those kind of charts, although there are some people in the audience who love them, right? What they want to do is find something in there that they think is an error and then argue with you in front of a group of people about something, and that will totally sidetrack if it's a presentation or a report. So this is something you never want to do. This is put up too much data in the beginning of a report. If I have to include this, it's going in the appendix of a report that I'm giving to someone who I want to have take action. So the way I start out is talking about my sample. Instead of having a bunch of numbers, I put up this picture, and I come up with a cute name for IPOs. So I call IPOs the fruit flies of management. People remember that. Now, why would I say such a thing? Because if I'm a biologist and I need to study whether a medicine's working or not, I don't want to give the medicine to an entity, something that's going to, if I'm studying death, it can't have a long lifespan because it'll take me too long to figure out if it worked or not. But fruit flies live and die quickly. So if I put my little medicine on the fruit fly, I, in a very short period of time, can do my study and decide whether it worked or not, because some of the fruit flies are going to die off. Now, the interesting things about IPOs is they do the same thing. I know it's very sad. But, and I know that, and I learned this not because I was studying it all, but I actually worked in an IPO before I got my PhD, and it was amazing to me that we grew quickly, we did our IPO, and within a couple years after the IPO, and of course after I left, the company was basically out of business. So what happens with IPOs is the companies work really hard, they have a business that's viable, they have customers, they're not all making a profit when they go public, right? And then they get this medicine, which is a whole bunch of money. And the money's put into the management team, and they either choose wisely or not. So if you spend all your money on something that's not going to help the company survive, you go out of business pretty quickly, because now they're in the public eye, everybody knows what they're doing, they're hiring quickly. There's all sorts of reasons, but basically the cool thing is we could study organizational death in a short period of time. So I've had teams of students and me, we're reading the newspapers, we're wandering down the halls of the university yelling, yay, we had another company go out of business, which is really kind of sad, but you need to have enough deaths to be able to statistically, significantly run your analyses. Now, again, I'm not giving people a lot of data, I'm talking about the context, but my story about fruit flies, what did that do? Hopefully it gives some validity to what I'm doing. And in addition, I talk about not just why IPOs, but also I know that a lot of the CEOs that I'm talking to are not in a company going public. So I give them a sample of the firms that I'm working on so they can see, oh, some of these firms are like me. So they're not all just high-tech, fast-growth companies. I mean, Vermont Teddy Bear Company was in one of our samples. Very different industries, different ages. The companies are not all in the U.S. Many of them are from other countries. They just go public here. So it's a very diverse sample, which makes the data generalizable. Again, I'm using a lot of pictures. I could have had a chart with a percentage of industries people were in, but instead I chose to put these pictures in and talk about them. So I'm making it real. Because in the beginning, people have to think my context is going to be relevant to them. Let's see. It looks like I lost the ability to move forward on the page.
Let me try to resend it over.
Yeah, I think I lost the presenter function. Somehow I got to aim. Okay, there you go. Thanks. All right, so here I go again. If I picked, if I'm presenting this to you, again, I would put this in the appendix. because presenting this, there is no way to present this in a way that's going to engage an audience. Now, there's somebody out there I know that's looking at this going, wow, I understand what that means, and look at her R-squared, it's beautiful. But most people are going to be bored out of their mind, and gee, do I want to really talk about all these variables? The answer is no. This is an appendix, and it's there for somebody who wants to read the detail, but I would never have this in my report or in a presentation. So what did I do? I wanted people to know I did my fancy analysis, so I told them what I did. I did a regression, I predicted the winners, and I put in control variables. And the question I was really looking at with this study was, what predicts winning after 10 years when I do all the fancy stuff I'm supposed to? And you know the answer is employee energy. So I had some questions and a survey of the executives, and I asked them what different things were important for their company's success. And this included financial metrics, marketing metrics, sales metrics, formal HR practices metrics, and some other things that I was studying, and one was employee energy. And employee energy ended up being really important in predicting 10-year performance. And with this particular sample, so we were looking at the cohort of companies that went public in 1996. The reason we chose them was because it was the biggest IPO cohort to date. There were about 900 companies that went public. We had data on about 820 of them. And we looked at first 10 years, what happened, what could we say predicted 10-year performance. And then just recently, we got all the data from the end of the year of 2016, and we looked at 20 years later what happened. And so we know energy got them to, employee energy got them to 10-year mark, and then something different got them to the 20-year mark. And along the way, I had a lot of interesting information of what happened to these companies. And so this is probably as many numbers as you'll see on one of my reports. So I wanted to quickly show people where the sample went. The study to me is kind of interesting because it's where are they now, kind of like rock stars, right? And I'm sorry, I think I said 820. It's 802 IPOs were studied. So we have, as of 20 years later, there are only 100 companies left. I think it's really cool that I have a very round 100 number. And we had a lot of exits. So what happened? A lot of them were acquired. In fact, a lot of them were acquired within 5 years. And we had some that just closed down. And you can see we looked at the acquisitions as either growth mergers or distressed mergers, which meant growth is my stock was going up. Distressed is I was in pretty bad shape, and so it was a fire sale. And again, this is just pretty easy for people to see. It's not a deep analysis, but it gives you some sense of what happened to them. And then what differentiated the 20-year survival? There was one survey question, which, and some that backed it up, so there's more than one question here, but this basically captures what we learned at the 20-year mark, and it's that the companies that were alive 20 years later, the CEOs at the time of the IPOs said that they were successful because their employees had a high sense of ownership in the company. And we did back that up by looking at whether they had profit sharing for all employees versus just the key executives and stock options and other things, and those were also significant. But the key thing is 20-year survival, living 20 years after IPO, was predicted by having a high sense of ownership. So the other interesting thing is what did not differentiate, and how did I do this? I just put a couple sentences on this piece of paper. So this is a paradox piece. All the things that they think should be important often are not. So anything we had in the leadership and management team made zero difference. Controlling costs, finances, zero. Technology and product characteristics, nope, did nothing. And think about it. The minute you go public, all of your information is now available and everybody knows about you. So how is technology going to stay a strong competitive advantage over time? You have to really be you have to be innovating ongoing. And how do you innovate? It's with employees, and maybe the employees have to have a strong sense of ownership in what they're doing to be able to give everything that's needed for innovation. Board of directors, no. Venture capitalists, sorry, no. And they might say that's okay because they don't really care about long-term performance. Controlling costs, that's probably one of my favorite ones. We asked that and found and looked at that information different ways. Nope, didn't make a difference. Budgeting process, no. We had a lot of information about formal HR practices, no. It was really these informal things, energy, sense of urgency, sense of ownership, that made a difference. So things that described climate a lot more. Now, usually when I get this far, I got people really interested. In fact, I've had people who are hardcore accounting people saying, you know what, I think you're on to something, Theresa. So I want to summarize it. Here's what I know. To make it to the 10-year mark, your employees have to be energized. They have to be working hard. They have to be moving forward. There's a lot of momentum. And to stay alive 20 years later, they have to have a high sense of ownership. Now, those are cool words, but you might not know what they mean, right? So where's my story? I have two ways to tell the story. So this is the theoretical way. So I talk about structural cohesion being behind all these things, and employee-generated synergy that propels the company forward. Now, that might sound kind of cool, but I agree. I mean, I think it's cool, and some people remember the word and they write it down, but it doesn't give me that sense of what it means. So what I did was basically took the 100 companies that are still alive, and I've been interviewing them. So I'm looking for stories from people that can supplement the story I have in the data. And one of the companies that I have permission to share is a company called Stericycle. So they're really interesting. And what's interesting about the 100, just as a side note, is a lot of them, they're just not sexy companies. They're not the ones you read about, but they're billion-dollar companies that have made it to the 20-year mark and look like they're going to keep making it. So Stericycle's one of them. They started their business when all that medical waste started, showing up on the East Coast beaches, and they said somebody has to solve this problem. And it was a long journey, and they worked together. If you go to their website, there's a video about the company, and I usually play the video when I'm talking about them. It's very inspiring. And the video is all about what makes them successful, and it's about their employees. And I interviewed the CEO, Mark Miller, and I have a couple quotes that I share on what he said. So all of a sudden I'm taking this really complex data, I boil it down to one story, and think I have the math behind it, that I'm really confident it's the right thing, and now I have case studies that I'm confident it's the right thing, and I'm bringing together all these pieces, the numbers, and then some quotes and pictures and a video so that people can get emotionally involved and try to understand it. And when they're thinking about it, thinking about how does my company, what's our sense of ownership in the company now, and if it's not where I want it to be, how do I increase it? And if you look at these quotes from Mark, they definitely support what we're saying. I want him to keep moving and move quickly. That's being energized. He used the word energized. And behave like it's your own company. Okay, so I still was struggling with, I like structural cohesion. I think that's what's behind it, but it's really boring. It comes from population ecology. There's this theory about it, and 90% of the people that I talk to won't care. So instead, I created this story of talking about structural cohesion as a story of the egg versus tennis ball. And so what does this mean? If you're moving forward as a company, so let's say your company is one of these two things. You're an egg or you're a tennis ball. No matter who you are as a company, you're going to hit an external force. So something's going to hit. Something's going to happen. There's going to be recession. Your CEO leaves. Your top client left. You have a lawsuit, a product recall. You have these things that happen no matter who you are that are just not good. So when you hit that wall, what happens? If you have a company that's like a tennis ball, you have structural cohesion, right? You have this employee-generated synergy. It's the synergy in the ball that propels the company forward so that when you hit the wall, you bounce forward. If you're a company that doesn't have structural cohesion, you're like the egg. You hit the wall and you just break. You can't make it because people don't have a sense of ownership. They're bailing. They're leaving. So this was the imagery I've used that seems to put the whole story together. All right, my guess is you have questions, and we will have questions at the end. So that, again, I could do an hour or 2 hours just on that study, but what I wanted to do is use that as an example of how I took some really, I want to say, could have been very boring data and tried to build a story with it that I could tell to multiple audiences so that they would do something about it. And that is what's happened. I've gotten really positive reactions to this. I have people ask me, how do we do this in our company? Or when they're at a point in their own organizations where they feel like, they've lost the sense of urgency and they've lost energy, how do they bring it back? So I feel like this is a story that's making sense. So let me just go back and try to put some of these pieces together with this data-driven storytelling checklist. So what do I want to do? I want to build confidence when I'm telling a story versus confusion. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times we're so afraid that somebody's not going to believe us that we put in way too much data and confuse the heck out of them. And I've seen this in the biggest companies with the smartest people because they're so intimidated by their senior executives. You don't convince with more data than you need. You convince by being confident in one message. You want to elicit emotion from your audience, and positive versus negative. So if I'm confused, you're going to get a lot of negative emotion from me. If I'm really busy and I'm stuck in a room with you for an hour and you're telling me the story and I have no idea what's going on and you're just giving me conflicting data, I'm going to be angry. We do not want that to happen. You want to purposely point people in a direction. So when you're practicing, you know, if you're the data geek, have your dialogue person in the room and you're practicing together, and you've got an audience that's telling you, oh, here's what I'm thinking, you know, you didn't do this. So it's just like you are orchestrating a movie. You're putting together a play, and in fact, we use a lot, when I teach, we use a lot of information from the way directors make movies to think about how I'm going to put together a paper, a report, a dashboard, or a presentation. You want to express a clear point of view, and that's really important. And I've spent probably an hour sometimes with audiences who will argue with me that we should not have a point of view, that having a point of view is wrong, that's how you lie with statistics. And I think that's why a lot of people in the analytics business don't tell a story, because they feel like it's wrong, it's morally wrong to impose their point of view on this topic. I would argue that's totally wrong, because if I'm spending money to hire you, I want to hear your point of view because you're knowledgeable. And before you do anything, we have to make sure that the people who are doing the work understand what their job is. And if they think their job is to just bring a bunch of data and not have a point of view, then you're not going to have the impact you want to have. In fact, I've worked with groups where they did not have a point of view, and I've seen them go from big investments in the company for this team where they hire maybe 5 people, they buy big databases. 3 or 4 years later, they find out absolutely nothing has changed, and they get rid of the department, they get rid of everything. So it's important that if we're going to bring the analytics skills into an organization, that we know that we're going to be judged on having an outcome. Okay, I personally, when I teach people, limit the use of numbers. Again, numbers, we find this from this neuroscience work, do not help people. They don't emotionally engage. You can use numbers, but use it in a context where, you know, again, put the details in the appendix, put the details at the back of the report, and just bring out the numbers that help you tell the story. And make it personal. So a lot of presentations I've done, you know, I spend a lot of time with the teams before. Like, let's say I'm presenting to a board of directors or senior executive team about something. I talk to people one-on-one and find examples of of a story about somebody in the company that I can tell when I'm talking about the numbers, so that so I have something that makes it personal for them. So for me, in my example, I had the quotes from Mark. So people, you know, and when I play the video, Mark is talking, so then you can see Mark, you can see the people in the company. You know, I'm bringing it to life. Use pictures. If nothing else, use pictures. Pictures to frame your audience are really important. And it takes time to find the right picture, and it's definitely worth it. But the pictures are going to put people emotionally in the space you want them to be. It's going to focus their attention on your message, and that's what you want to do in order to get them into a dialogue, a purposeful dialogue that drives action and measurable business results. The other easy thing to do is title things correctly. So I see a lot of groups that they show me the reports, and they're like, oh, look at these reports. There's 10 reports we did this year, and none of them are being, you know, nobody's taking any action, and then we present them to the executives, and they don't do anything with it. And the titles are something like, you know, longitudinal or regression analysis with blah, 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 blah. And I don't even know what it means. So why would you pick that up and read it? The title is really important. Subtitles are important, and catchy phrases. So the fruit flies of management. I remember a lot of my academic friends made fun of me for saying some of these terms, but they work incredibly well. So I'm not lying. I'm not doing anything that I think is hurtful. I'm putting phrases in that allow people to get on the same page as me and pay attention. So I'll ask this question. Based on what I did, the story about the IPOs, what will you remember? Will you remember any of those numbers I flashed by? My guess is if you're thinking about this now, you're going to remember the pictures, you're going to remember some of those terms, you might remember the tennis and the egg, and that's okay. You could always go back and get the details. And this is what we need to think about when we're done with a report, when somebody's looked at our dashboard, when somebody's looked at, come to one of your presentations, what do you want them to remember? All right, so before I finish, I want to just kind of go back and talk about some steps. So we talked about the people, we talked a little bit about why do this. I think it's important to know that my version of data-driven storytelling is not just visualization. And you can do cool charts, but it's not a story, it's different. It's a good skill to be able to make interesting charts versus not interesting charts, but the charts alone do not tell a story. So here's a couple steps, again, just to give you some of the tools we use. I think about the process in 3 steps. So the first step is grounding. Grounding yourself in the data and grounding yourself in the story, the context, the company, the people, what's happening. The second part is creating. So once I've grounded myself, then I create. I start thinking about the story that's emerging, and I do some simple data analysis. And what I've seen, it's really important to start with simple data analysis. So you look at your means, you look at your distribution, you think about your sample. Don't start doing complex analyses right away. You need to get yourself immersed in the data before you just start searching for random associations. And then the last step is merging together what you've learned about the data and the story and the people and the company to put together the story. And I'll give you a little bit more on that. So grounding. This is kind of like the first phase of ideation. Don't get into the details. I love using mind maps and all these other things. That you want to think non-linearly at this stage. So get your data and your dialogue people together. Talk about what's happening in the company, and then just look at some of the data and start, just start laying out ideas and resist the temptation to start doing analysis right away. And then the creating piece. And this is where I use a story arc. So then we start taking that more creative piece and putting it together in a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you think about your ideas. You think about kind of what actions you want people to take. And, what are some hypotheses. And really, it's all just a story. It's pretty simple. Then the last piece is putting this together. So merging your instincts and ideas with the data and creating a model that makes sense. And then, again, working as a team, this is a lot easier to do. So basically what you end up doing is finding a story and then telling a story. So get your data, the data that you need. So for me, I had to collect a lot of data because I didn't want to just tell a story about HR. I wanted to say, okay, I think there's a people story here, but it's not, again, I didn't want to just force my ideas. I had a hypothesis, but it's about people versus finance and marketing and technology. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get all that data and say, here's all these things that might predict performance. Which one is it going to be? And I have to realize the story might not be about people. Luckily it was, which made me happy. But you get the complete data, the right data, so that when you do have to have those difficult conversations, you can prove to the best of your ability that your point of view has at least some credibility and support behind it. And then I have a note here of, don't forget qualitative data. Qualitative data is really important. I don't think I've ever done a study where I haven't had quantitative and qualitative data. So like my doctoral students, I have one that has a big story about Vermont Teddy Bear Company. So they go out and they have all this data, but they can supplement it with the story of a real company. And then you focus your data and sign the story. You can use different genres. You can write a script. There's all sorts of really cool tools to do that. And then lastly, you tell your story. And I'm going to go back to the DDAR model. So the important thing to remember is that story doesn't just belong there. Story and the dialogue create a multiplicative effect on the results. So you're going to get a higher business impact. You're going to make more money. You're going to have a higher ROI if you have more people taking action because they're all engaged in the change that has to be made. Right, we're going to go to questions. I just have 2 more things I want to tell you about before we do that. So if you have some questions and you want to start writing them into the chat section, that would be really helpful. If you don't have enough data and you're just thinking, I really want some new data to be able to tell stories with, we, the team at CEO is, and this is some work that I'm continuing, is relaunching the Leadership Pulse. Some of you might have been in this already, but basically I started this in 2003 to collect data from leaders all over the world and short pulses that we provide back to people. So if you participate, you get a personal diary that is not, again, it's your own personal data, nobody else sees it. And so that what we're looking at doing is collecting data, reflecting on it, and then we provide webinars and coaching calls to learn. And the idea is that you use this data to create your own action results. And it's all focused on leadership development and helping current leaders get better at what they're doing based on real-time data, and helping professionals who are working towards being in leadership positions do that. We get data from a lot of different sources, so it's good benchmarking. There are a couple membership levels that do have a cost to them, but they're significantly very low priced. So we're motivated by getting the data and sharing it with everybody. We also have a gamification platform on the back end, and we have digital badges for people working through this module. So for us, it's an executive learning experience. And then, as I mentioned, I do teach the data-driven storytelling program, and we have the next program July 30th and 31st in Atlanta, and UPS is hosting, so thank you to them. And if you're interested by being on the webinar, there's a little bit of financial incentive. We can get 10% off. All right, we're opening it up to questions, and please, I think if you can just write something in the chat box, that will work. And if you want to put your hand up, I think we can unmute your line also. And I do have someone who asked for the full assessment tool, and I can send that to you. I think if you want the assessment tool that I talked about earlier, if you just give us your emails or send a note to CEO or just put in the chat box, we can get that out to you. Oh, and then someone asked me, stories are 22 times more memorable than facts or figures. Where did I get that from? I don't remember, but I could look that up and we can send that to you. So I know it's from some of the neuroscience work. And then someone asked, when will the agenda be posted for the session in Atlanta? I can send you one of the last year's agenda right away. I'm going to change this one a little bit, but probably have that ready in a couple weeks. Any other questions? Yeah, and if you don't have questions, I'd love to get your feedback. I would guess some of you are in departments that are doing some of this type of work, so if you have something you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear that too. I have another question here. What are the key HR implications of the emphasis on storytelling? What I've seen is that their work is taken much more seriously. So again, it just goes back to this idea of taking action and results. And I have, there's a number of webinars on the CEO website, and I have some that I've done with business executives who've used this tool. And one I love is one from General Motors. I mean, there are so many examples of analytics departments. And we all have big data right now, and even at the universities, they have analytics departments. One of the things we're all struggling with is, so you have more data, that doesn't mean you're really making a difference. The implications are that HR can not only be they can start using their data in a better way by telling stories with the data and really teaching that skill, but also what I've seen is HR then helps other departments. So I've worked with HR groups on doing this, and they immediately say, can you please help our accounting and finance departments? Now, luckily, you know, and I often don't have to do it, because if people go through the program, they've got the tools and they can do it themselves. But we're not, I mean, HR isn't the only group that needs help with this. There are lots of departments where people are presenting and we're all falling asleep. So I think HR has the ability to really help themselves and the rest of the company. And then where can we, another question, where can we get more information on the Atlanta session? If you go to the Center for Effective Organization website, and I think I have it up here, it's http://ceo.usc.edu. The information is on the right-hand side of the home page, and you can find that there. I would love to see all of you in the class. How is employee energy measured? That's a great question. So I have a massive amount of research on employee energy at work. And if you want to take a test drive on how I measure energy, there's a site. It's www.whatsmyenergy, all one word, WATSMYENERG.com, whatsmyenergy.com. And that's how I measure it at the individual level. When I did it in the IPO studies, I had a little bit different questioning because it was asking really about the employee energy of the whole company. Let me see. Oh, here's a really good question. What if there is no story emerging from the data? So this happens all the time with dashboards. So people will give me their dashboard and say, okay, I have to tell a story. And you know what? I tell people there is no story. So the line I like to use is preventive maintenance. I mean, sometimes you're collecting data because you just want to make sure everything's okay. And I think when there's no story in the data, you just admit it. Say, hey, this is important data. It's preventive maintenance. We don't have anything right now. And you know, the same thing happens in all the other disciplines. So when there's not a story, we just don't tell a story. And again, if somebody else has another answer to that, I would love to hear it. Let's see, I'm looking for another question. So this question asks, could you define employee energy from ownership a bit more? Not sure I understand the difference. So employee energy really is, so I think about energy, it's an individual metric, so the degree to which I'm energized by my work. The definition of energy is the ability to do work. That's from physics. So we measure your ability to do work. And again, the way that I measured, I've done work on energy. I have over 1 million data points on employee energy. I've done measurement of it all around the world, and it predicts performance incredibly well, but in the same way. So energy is an optimization metric, not a maximization metric. So the way we measured, if you go to that website I mentioned, is that we ask people on a 0 to 10 scale where they are on energy. And what you'll see is that there's low energy, there's medium energy, there's high energy, and then you can get to a point where you have so much input that you are at risk of burnout, you're overly energized. So think about it like your body pulse. Like if you were going to start running and you haven't run before, the doctor wouldn't tell you to go as fast as possible. You look at the flow of your blood, your body pulse. You want to be in the zone where you're at your best, right? And you try to exercise and maintain in that area. And what we've learned, taking lessons from physics and sports physiology, is that employee energy at work acts in the same way. So I'm going to be at a level of energy where I'm at my best and productive, and I want to minimize variance. It's also a lot like total quality. So again, employee energy is around me. The way I measured it in the IPO work was it was the degree to which the executives thought employee energy or the level of employee energy was critical to their company's success. And then sense of ownership is something people feel. So we ask whether they have a sense of ownership in their company. Do you feel like you really own this company? Do you make decisions because you feel like an owner? And then their sense of ownership in their particular job. So we're looking at 2 aspects. They're different, but they're very related. People who have a high sense of ownership also have high and stable energy. So think about it. If I'm abused, if I'm at a super high level of energy and I'm not getting my work done, you know, I just feel like I'm at risk of burnout, and then all of a sudden I'm spent. So what I've seen is on the 0 to 10 scale, people are going 10, 10, 10, and then they go down to a 2, 2, 2, and then 10. This wild fluctuation is really bad. It makes people not like their leaders. It makes them not very productive, and eventually I see they leave the company. So these 2 things are related, but different concepts.
Theresa, we have a question from Jacqueline Lieberman, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute her.
All right, thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Theresa. This has been quite helpful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I work, I'm a partner at an agency called Story Worldwide, which is why I was interested in this webinar. And I've been working the last year developing what I call Story Score, which is basically how we're measuring brand stories. So we write and test brand stories versus advertisements. And it's all about testing with the System 1 type in your brain. And so my question to you is the methodology as it stands now, and what I like about it is that what it's testing is when we write these stories, and they're short stories, envision almost like a script, a TV script. So it's short, but there are words on the page, and the degree and the speed to which people actually read that story and then they react, and they choose their reaction from Paul Eckhart's choice of 8 emotions. And my question to you is, I know that you talk a lot about visual storytelling, and what I like about this methodology thus far is that it's not hinged on visual storytelling. It's really about the words and how it moves people. Because in advertising, to me, it's more authentic to kind of understand, does the actual story move people versus talent holding a product or the scene in the background. So I just would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I'm not seeing it, but I don't know that they're in conflict, because if I think about the pictures being important, the picture is the thing that makes, like, it's the start of the story in my brain, and it's the memory piece. It's the thing where I remember. And then instead of having words, you know, again, you might have words, you might have video, you might be telling the story yourself. So in a lot of our examples, people are actually telling the story. So what we've seen is, so I think that the story, if you added a picture that was a visual cue in front of that, my guess is it would be even more compelling than what you're getting with the story. And it's a different context because you're, you know, again, it's branding work. But a lot of what we're doing in the data-driven storytelling in the HR space, we have taken from marketing and from movie making. So again, that makes sense to me, and I'd love to see more of it. I just, again, I found the pictures really help a lot, and the people that I work with have had really good experiences with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, so there's another question here. I think challenge in supporting and gathering more qualitative data is that there's a big spend on KPIs and dashboards. Okay, so what about that? So there is a lot on dashboards, and it's kind of interesting because I see a lot of executives who don't like their dashboards. I mean, at first they get excited about it because they have access to data, but they don't know what to do with it. So, and I keep, like one of my little side projects is how do we make dashboards more interesting? Like I would love to see the dashboards have a newspaper front end, where you're really pulling out the stories in the dashboard. But again, you're not always going to have a story. But you know, how do you get some more so people don't get mad at the dashboards? I mean, I'm just seeing managers yelling at me when I ask them about their data. So I do something called the data audit with some companies, where we go in and we interview the users of data, and we ask them what kind of data they're using, what kind of dialogues they're having with it, what action's been taken, and what are the results. And as you can imagine, what I get, so I'm interviewing, let's say, the HR executives, the managers, the senior team, generalists, managers, et cetera. And what I see is lots of data, hardly any dialogue, less action, and no one has measurable results to offer. So somehow we need to move past, I mean, I think the dashboards are great because now we have data, but somehow we've got to move from that to get the cases and the stories and keep them somewhere. And I don't have the answer yet, but I think it's a really good challenge for us, because if the dashboards don't get a little more interesting, people aren't going to use them. Okay, somebody, thank you out there, found my 22 more memorable quote, and they said it's Jerome Bruner in a text, Actual Minds, Possible Worlds. Thank you. Don't you love the ability for people to do research? What's the key differences between energy and engagement? Okay, so energy to me is it's about the ability to do work. It's active, it's about momentum. Engagement, unfortunately, in most of the ways people define it, is about staying at work. So I'm willing to stay, I'm not leaving, I like it here, et cetera. I think engagement's more passive and energy is more active. And there's another question. You mentioned firm going for an IPO, but how can regular small businesses benefit? And if you mean from how, so I think the question is, when it goes back to the IPO study, IPOs benefit. I think any growth company would benefit from the lessons from the IPO work, because basically the IPO is an organizational change event. And it's one in particular where the company is at a point in their growth where they need to get financing. And there are other ways of getting financing, right? So right now, not as many people are going public, but they're getting equity. They're merging and doing acquisitions. All of these change events are the same. And in at least the case study work I do, so I haven't had the massive databases like I get in the IPOs, but I've done cases with companies going through these other kinds of changes, and it's the same thing. Sense of ownership is important. And there's three things I see are important in differentiating a successful company, a long-term success company, from one that's not. Is employee energy, that they have high employee energy levels that are optimized. They're not trying to burn people out, but they're keeping them excited about work. And the energy is combined with, and energy to me is this personal level, and then the other term I use is a sense of urgency. There's a high sense of urgency in the culture. But people don't feel burned out from it. They feel like they can manage it because they're valued. They have a high sense of ownership. So I think of those three things together. The culture has a high sense of urgency. I'm really energized about what's going on here. I'm excited because I have a high sense of ownership in the company. This is mine. I'm excited about it getting better. I know I'm going to benefit. I know people care about me. And it's those things together that seem to drive performance. And a lot of times what we're doing is just focusing on the making people feel valued piece of it without driving the sense of urgency. So those two things are really important. In fact, in some of the engagement research I've done, I see that when you just focus on valuing people at the expense of urgency, that leads to negative consequences too. And I just noticed I'm 3 minutes over, which I don't normally do. So we better wrap this up. And I want to thank you so much for all your questions, for paying attention. If anybody has any additional questions for me, I'm happy to talk to you. And if anybody can be in Atlanta in July, join us. And then don't forget the Leadership Pulse, because that's an exciting new venture. We are relaunching it. We took 2 years off from doing it, and we'd love to have you involved. Thank you so much, and look forward to hearing from some of you.
So Theresa, we're also getting a lot of requests for the full assessment tool. So I'll just mention that we will be sending out an email to everyone who participated with links to the slides and a link to the video as well. And we can add that in or add some sort of link to the full assessment tool as well.
All right. Thanks for your help, and have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.